a very, very British coup taking place. An attempt to remove a democratically elected leader by a number of mechanisms that is actually undermining democracy within our party and our movement. And it didn't start, it just didn't start a few weeks ago after the referendum. It started the minute that Jeremy got elected. As some of you may recall his first speech in the QE2 when he actually was elected. And when it was running on television, and I watched it later, along the bottom of that television clip was shadow cabinet members resigning, announcing their resignation. That was within 2 minutes of the start of his speech. So they started there to undermine him. And we knew their tactics and what the strategy was overall, because, as I said elsewhere, maybe a bit too figuratively, they are useless plotters. We knew what was going on because they told us. We had people at their meetings who were coming out to tell us what was going on. And the plan was this, is that they would await an election of some sort, and the first one was the Oldham by-election, and the argument was that we would be crushed in the Oldham by-election. People would see through Jeremy, and they would launch the coup at that point in time. Well, we went to Oldham. And we had a fantastic local candidate, and we combined it with the enthusiasm that was brought as a result of Jeremy's election. Large numbers of people from all over the country, Momentum members and others, came in, and we had a resounding victory at Oldham. And what then happened is, well, they said, well, we'll wait for the next group of elections. And the next group of elections were the local council elections and the mayoral elections. So the coup was meant to be mounted once we'd lost the mayoral elections and we'd had disasters in the local council elections. Well, we won every mayoral election. We won every one. And I tell you, it was great to win London. But the pleasure for me was to see Marvin Rees, a black man elected in Bristol that founded his wealth on the slave trade through centuries. Please, nearer the mic.
Can somebody fix the mic, please?
I'll hold it. I'll
The
hold it.
mic on the table.
The local council elections were also meant to be a crushing defeat for us. We held on to every local council. We matched Ed Miliband at his highest in terms of local council victories. And he had those, if you recall, when the economy was in recession and the Tories were points behind in the opinion polls. So the plot never came then. And then what they decided is that they would launch the coup after the European referendum if it went wrong. And it did go wrong, let's be frank about it. And they sought already during the campaign to blame Jeremy if it did go wrong. But let me tell you this, Jeremy worked harder than any member of the Shadow Cabinet. He did thousands of miles touring the country, meeting after meeting. But we did have criticisms of the campaign. We left the campaign to Hilary Baird and Andrew Eagle. That was the deal that we did in September. And our criticisms were these, that we couldn't have just a straight Europhile campaign. We had to campaign on the basis of Remain but reform. And we were being attacked from the left and the right for that, right? From the left we were being attacked at times because some wanted Brexit, because of the treatment of Greece. So we brought Yanis Varoufakis and he toured around with me. So basically, whatever the treatment of Greece, we need you to remain within the EU. But we also wanted a programme of reform. And we felt the campaign was weak because it didn't put forward those reform proposals. And if you visited towns up north, to be frank, it was very difficult on the doorstep to win that argument, but we did our best. And as I say, Jeremy worked incredibly hard on all of that. But the result wasn't what we wanted. And to be frank, it was despondent the day we lost on Brexit, because we knew the consequences for our economy, and our community, the attack on civil liberties and trade union rights, employment conditions and environmental regulations. We knew that. On the Saturday after Brexit, what happened was that we got a phone call from the Observer that Hilary Benn was phoning round members of the Shadow Cabinet, urging them to resign. And the plot was that, as exactly as Matt said, they would resign in batches. And what would happen is the group would resign, and we would thought, well, we've stabilised the situation, we'll appoint other people into that position, and then an hour later, another group would resign. We'd seek to stabilise it, then another group would resign. And as Matt was said, the media were being informed before even we were. Even at midnight on that Saturday, Jeremy spoke to Hilary Benn after tracking him down and asked him to withdraw the proposals, issue a joint statement with him, and he could remain in position. Hilary refused. So Jeremy had no other alternative but to sack him that night. And to be frank, if you've got a person plotting to undermine your whole administration, what else can you do? What else can you do? What then happened is Jeremy appointed a new shadow cabinet. And I tell you, the people who came forward, the youngsters that came forward, not many of them have been in Parliament that long. People like Becky Longbaby, Richard Bergen, Angela Rayner, Cat Smith, Clive Lewis. I tell you, they're the heroes and heroines of our movement. They came forward when we needed them. They came forward when we desperately needed them, and they did it not out of personal ambition, but out of commitment and loyalty to our movement. And they performed brilliantly. I tell you also, it's given me ideas about slimmed down government. And I want to thank them for what they've done as a result of that. And we've managed to get through the parliamentary cycle. We've managed to mount an opposition which I think has been effective throughout that period. The arguments that were put forward, we went to that parliamentary Labour Party meeting after the Brexit vote, and the arguments that were put forward at that point in time was one, Jeremy, that's exactly as Matt said, you're a great bloke, you're all, I agree with lots of the things you're saying, but you can't win elections. We've just won every parliamentary by-election, the mayor election, the local government elections. And the irony of that meeting, that parliamentary Labour Party meeting, the first item on the agenda was to welcome the candidate for Tooting who just tripled the majority in Tooting. Couldn't win under Jeremy, won with a triple majority. So what then happened, the argument was that you're not the sort of leader we want, not the sort of leader we need. To be frank, I do not want a leader like Tony Blair. I don't want a leader like Gordon Brown. I don't want a leader that overrides the wishes of their own party, takes us to a war that's cost maybe 500,000 deaths in the Middle East as a result of almost hubris. I want a leader that listens to the party, that consults, that resolves conflicts rather than creates them. And I don't want a leader either that's described as an iron fist to drive policies through. Jeremy is a different type of leader. He's one, I think, that reflects what we need as a party. Someone who brings people together, gives them the resources to develop their ideas, to mobilise within their communities, and listens, above all else, listens. So all the arguments that were thrown against him in that debate, to be frank, were fallacious. And I realised really this wasn't about Jeremy Corbyn. It wasn't anything to do with Jeremy, his style of leadership or his electability or anything like that. What this was the establishment, exactly as Matt has said. This was the establishment telling you and me, how dare you elect a socialist as the leader of the Labour Party? How dare you? What the establishment wants is what it's had too often in the past in terms of Labour leaders. Labour leaders who may talk a strong argument for socialism, but actually never implement it and are readily incorporated. What the establishment wanted is the return to politics as normal, which is simply the rotation of the elites rather than any challenge to their power or their wealth within our society. And that's what Jeremy is to them. He's a threat. We're a threat. Because what we're trying to do is create a different type of society. One in which the establishment's power and wealth will be redistributed. And it will be done on the basis of a society that was radically transformed. One that is radically transformed by being fairer, more democratic, more equal, but based upon, yes, a prosperous economy, but that economy that's economically and environmentally sustainable, but above all else, where that prosperity is shared by all. We call that, it's a word sometimes not used in the last 15 years in our movement, we call that socialism. And that's what we're about. Since the triggering of the election, leadership election, which again I find desperate, exactly as has been said, just at the time we need a united opposition against the Tories, when Brexit's hitting us, when a new Tory Prime Minister is setting out an agenda which I think will take us backwards rather than forwards, will result in further austerity measures later in the year, cuts in public services, the undermining of rights, the return of grammar schools, a whole reactionary agenda, just at a time we need a strong Labour opposition. They drive us into an unnecessary leadership election. And even worse than that, and this is what so offends me and many others, I think, they seek to rig it. They seek to rig it. First of all, they tried to prevent Jeremy even being on the ballot paper. We then had the challenge from one rich donor, Michael Foster. So we had one rich donor trying to deny 500,000 people the right, the opportunity to vote for the leader of their choice. Well, we overcame that in the courts. But then they tried another one. And it was late in the National Executive meeting. A few people had gone and they laid around a paper which then introduced a 6-month clause in which people had to qualify. 14 people voted for that. 14 people. So 14 people denied 140,000 people the right to vote in this leadership election. To be frank, that's an absolute scandal in a party that calls itself democratic. Absolute scandal. Not content with that, they then introduce the purge. And it is becoming, exactly as Matt said, this is becoming bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. To be frank, you want to be careful. Being here tonight, having any association with me, don't call me as a witness, whatever you do. We don't know the numbers yet of the people that are being purged at the moment, but some of them are absolutely appalling. And what we have to do now is make sure that we stand by those comrades, that we actually argue for their rights. There'll be some, of course, who are suspended. No one supports abuse within our movement or within our party or whatever. There'll be some who are suspended because of levels of abuse that we're told, and we shouldn't do that. But we also have to respect the right to express people to express their views and the right of freedom of speech within our movement as well. And we should not allow a disproportionate sanction to be used against such a large number of members, it seems, from what we're seeing in social media itself. This now, we're seeing again, as we did last year, people angry that one, we're going through a leadership election at all. Secondly, they're angry at the way in which this attempt to be rigged. And thirdly, I think they're angry at the nature of the debate. Last year, I chaired Jeremy's campaign last year. I've said we're not going to do this every year, are we? last year, to be frank, all the candidates got on pretty well. There was no personality politics as such. There was a proper debate around the policies, and at the end of it, in that QE2 green room, when the announcement of the results came through, there was comradeship. People hugged each other, there was a few tears, but there was respect for each other. This year, the debate has hardly been around policy. It's largely been personalised around Jeremy. And it is true, the avalanche from the media has been extraordinary. I'm secretary of the NUJ group in Parliament as well. I helped set the group up. And I fight for the rights of journalists to write what they feel is appropriate, their journalistic standards, the quality of journalism, their right to report. But to be frank, the way in which the media has treated us over these last few months, I think has taken large sections of our media into the gutter in the way we've not seen